Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Boruto Manga chapter review. This one's going to be for chapter 33, which is called Breaking the Limit. And this chapter basically covered the finish of the Naruto versus Delta fight that's been going on for the last, I suppose including this one, 3 chapters. And I think while there's some good content in here, it suffers from the exact same problems that the last 2 chapters of this fight suffered from, and that is poor pacing, too many, I suppose, filler pages, and it just not feeling like a monthly chapter, it not feeling like 40 pages of content. And the biggest example of that, most egregious example of this, is definitely I think it's like 9 or so pages of like taijutsu that we get at the start of this chapter, which felt exactly the same as like those pages that we got the previous month. And it's just, the whole point of last month's chapter was to get us to the point where this is now the fight at like 100%. We are entering the finish of this fight. So why do we have to sort of restart it again almost in this chapter of just have them, have this talk a little bit back and forth, blah, 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 come at each other, spar a little bit, and then get into the finish of the fight? It just felt so unnecessary and just backwards in terms of the pacing that a monthly chapter should have. I don't need you to go back over why this fight is intense all of a sudden. I get you need to have some like immediate continuation in terms of just Kawaki's injury, the fact that he at some point might need to go back to Kara to, be fixed. And that was an interesting bit of dialogue on like the first page. But then after that, all this early section is doing is just getting across that, okay, Naruto is actually angry at this point because of Delta putting the kids at risk and so on. So again, why do you immediately jump in? Angry Naruto just does some taijutsu at the start, and he's apparently so angry he just punches her but also gets hit himself. And it's just this even 50-50 part of the fight that just means absolutely nothing other than it's the artist and the writer filling in, about a quarter of the chapter with just this kind of add nothing to the story and the arc and the characters part of the fight. Because once they finally get into what they're doing, it's a clever finish to the fight. I like the whole idea of Naruto realizing that, okay, she can absorb my jutsu. This seems to be this crazy broken ability that she can just absorb any jutsu that she wants, but she's absorbing it. That energy has to go somewhere. That chakra that she's taking from that attack has to go somewhere. It's not just being dispersed, she's taking it into herself. So that means there is a limit on the amount that she can contain. And Naruto basically takes the bet that I know I have basically the biggest, chakra store of any person in the world. I can overload her however much she can take in. And so we get into the fact that he blocks her kind of unhealable death beam from her eyes and with a Rasengan, and it just continues to make it bigger and bigger, pump more and more chakra in, so she has to keep absorbing, otherwise she'll get hit with this, obviously super giant Rasengan. And eventually it works. Boruto kind of figures it out in the background, and it's just this case of he eventually basically overheats her eye and she can't use it anymore. It's also revealed that she can't use her drone anymore, which they didn't use enough in the fight. Because going back, like the drone was meant to be this thing where it gave her these kind of extra angles on the fight, and that might have been part of why the fight was more even than we thought, but they never pointed that out in any sort of big way. So it was kind of weird that there wasn't too much of a focus on that, and they just returned to it here. But still, her eye overheats, the fight basically comes to an end with her now defenseless, getting hit with one of these giant Rasengans, and that's it. It's basically a one-hit KO for the most part with this just one big move. That said, it feels a little uncreative and just a little unsatisfying that, like, okay, like, what am I meant to take away from the fact that it was like 3 chapters of Delta is basically on Naruto's level, yet it's just a big Rasengan? That's what kind of wins him the fight. Like, he didn't have to use any, like, tail beast bomb style thing, any of the crazy, like, elemental kind of beast bombs, like the lava style or anything like that. He didn't have to use any of those those crazy attacks that he'd use. No, like double giant Rasengan. It's just one giant Rasengan. It just, while it was huge and it created a huge crater in the ground, it just felt a little like, that's the way you're gonna finish this fight. Like, okay. It was impressive in that he was just, I suppose, using energy and just using chakra, and so standard Rasengan fit what he was trying to do, of course. But it just was a little dull in the end. But yeah, she's defeated. She's just left there on the ground. I don't think she's dead. So that's part of why, like, I also feel like I have such a big criticism this month, especially with those, taijutsu pages, of just like the way the chapter ends is just so weird to me, that it's just the fight is over. Delta's there in the ground. Naruto's, obviously out of breath, but he just, does a thumbs up over to the kids. He's fine. He's managed to get through this okay. And yeah, they're just like, new arc coming up. No attempt to really give any sort of sense of like, wait, Kashin Koji's still in the village. Like, is the next arc like happening like the next day, like continuing on from directly from this, or are we just gonna skip ahead and suddenly like Kashin Koji's left? What are they doing with Delta's body? Like, I get that stuff that can be covered at the start of next month's chapter, but because this chapter, in the grand scheme of things, didn't have a lot of events specifically happen over the course of the 40 plus pages that we got, it felt so kind of unsatisfying that just basically, in terms of plot, very little actually happened here, in that it was basically just Naruto overloads her eye, takes her out with the giant Rasengan, and that's it. That's the entire like event kind of structure of this chapter. It's literally just that happening, with some teases of Naruto now knows about Jigen and wants to go after him, and Delta says that Kawaki will probably have to come back to their doctor to be healed, because of course his arm was hit by her kind of unhealable kind of death ray thing. So his arm isn't just going to regenerate on its own. So the question, I suppose, is then going to be, do they find some way to heal his arm back for him in the Leaf Village, or will they have to continue their investigation of Kara also to heal Kawaki? So is Kawaki just going to be injured for like a good amount of time in the story here, or what? As for, I suppose, what we're meant to take away from, I suppose, Delta's fighting ability versus Naruto, this is another reason why I think the whole Giant Rasengan finish, that specifically being the move that he uses to take her out, is kind of has me going like, wait, what way are we really meant to interpret this? Because most of this fight has been getting across the idea that basically, okay, Naruto is above Delta's level. I think that much was made clear enough from just the way the fight actually went. He ended up beating her, so he's above her fighting level. But she was close enough to where it felt like he should have had to use a bit of a bigger move to take her out in the end. I get maybe they were establishing that it was just some very specialized thing that was keeping her in the fight. But are we meant to interpret it that the true takeaway from this is that Naruto truly was pushed too close to his absolute maximum, or that if he had gone full out from the start, he probably could have defeated her fairly comfortably, because one Rasengan ultimately did it? Because I suppose the thing I'm taking from this is that, like, if he had just gone all out from the start, just chucking jutsu at her, her power would have kind of overloaded as well. And he probably would have won just from that. So that's where it's a little bit frustrating, because the weird pacing of the fight with the constant taijutsu sequences, which don't really add anything to the fight, of course, kind of get in the way of that, because that has to be sort of 50-50, and it didn't really mean all that much. So with this fight, I'd ultimately just hope that when the anime gets around to covering this, that it just creates a bit more of a unique aspect to this fight than the way the manga actually did it. So overall, I suppose with this fight, I think they did some good things in it for sure. Like the reveal of Delta's kind of eye lasers and the kind of special ability that they have, how Naruto actually goes about countering that. That is all, I think, fairly good. but how long it took to get there was definitely the problem here. And again, like I know a lot of people don't like the fact that I criticize the pacing and the monthly format of the manga basically in every chapter. But I think when it affects basically every chapter, it is something that you do have to bring up. I don't think it should be just a thing where I say issue in the first chapter that I'm not a fan of this monthly pacing, I don't feel they're using the pages well enough, and I just leave it there because I said it the first time. I think it has to continue to be said, otherwise, you know, what are we really doing here with critiquing it? Why should we just like accept what I consider to be a kind of poor choice of how they're choosing to do the format and how they're choosing to do the pacing? I think it needs to be brought up and pointed out in every chapter how the nature of this is affecting the overall story. Because imagine that you were using these pages to the full extent, like how much more we could get done, how much more this fight could have been if they did more, if they didn't just fill in like half of the chapters with like taijutsu sequences and like recapping bits that happened in the last month. If the page count meant more, there'd be so much more going on here. And it's borderline to the point where I'm kind of like, why isn't this like manga like bi-weekly? Why isn't it just like one 10-page chapter every 2 weeks? Because that's the way most of these chapters feel, is that there's realistically 10 to 15 pages that don't need to be there to add anything to the story. So, you know, if the artist and writer just wrote like per month 2 chapters that were like, you know, in or around 15 pages, like that's probably what it would be better off that way, I think, rather than trying to do these big chapters that only really feel like 1 or 2 and that just have all these extra pages that don't really add to anything, and then makes the pacing feel bad because there's so little happening in each chapter. So, you know, I don't think it's been a problem with every single chapter, but these fight chapters especially, it really stands out in that I was actually putting a lot of praise on the series during the more character-focused sections of this kind of Kawaki arc, when he was first brought back to the village and what they did, you know, in the couple of chapters, I suppose, before this fight started. They used those well. Like when they're just doing like character stuff, it's actually really well done. But then just trying to have a fight happen in this format is definitely where it really struggles. So, you know, I that's why I think it's worthwhile to continue to kind of speak out about the pacing, because it is an overall issue that if they made a change just with regards to adding more content into each chapter, they could fix this. If they did more of the pages, they could fix this. It's not that it's just this problem that's always going to be there. It can be fixed, and I think that's why it's important to bring it up every time. And especially with like the whole idea of just like the counterpoint to that is obviously like, okay, if you disagree with my criticism, that means you enjoy the pacing of this. So you're okay with waiting a month to get a chapter where Naruto overloads her energy and hits her with a big ball Rasengan, and that's the only thing that happens in the entire chapter. Like, that's the issue here. In that, like, this chapter especially, you probably could have done it in 1 chapter. You probably could have done this in about 10 pages, without losing really anything specific from this chapter, given the setup that you had from before. So I'm just going to end it there before I start kind of repeating myself. But yeah, like, I don't hate this manga or anything like that, but I think this fight highlighted, in a way, some of the worst aspects that were present previously in the series, and just, you know, put those up to like 10 and just really show them off completely that, okay, the pacing doesn't work for fights like this, the monthly format really doesn't work. In that, like, all the chapters of this, didn't they set it up that like, oh, the next chapter will be the conclusion to the fight, and they just continue it on, even though it's only 3 chapters, but it took place over the course of 3 months, you know, a quarter of a year to get this fight. And is it even all that great? I don't think so. I hope the anime does better with it, but not particularly great. And then character-wise, I don't think we got too much out of that either. Other than I thought it was interesting that Boruto was the one to sort of figure out what Naruto was doing, whereas Kawaki was more like getting worried maybe for Naruto. And then just, you know, the little teases here and there of like, oh, this might be happening, but I want to see some character stuff come back into things coming up next, and I hope they don't just skip past the fact that like Kashin Koji's just there in the background somewhere and resolve what if they do anything with Delta or not, and so on. Is she dead? That's some of the frustration with this chapter of just like, if this is the end of an arc, you didn't really end it all that well, but okay. So that's my thoughts on Boruto chapter 33. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts on this chapter were. If you disagree with what I'm saying about the pacing, let me know in detail why you feel the pacing is good. Because I have in a couple of the previous chapters got people just basically saying, oh, stop complaining about the pacing, without really explaining why they feel it's like invalid criticism. So if you really do disagree, let me know why you disagree, because obviously I've taken the time here in this video to present my point of why I think the pacing is kind of not great. So I think you need to do the same to kind of counter that. So that's my thoughts on chapter 33 of Boruto. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts are, but that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.